Our people are the ones that generate our revenue. And so I think it's just really critical that we take time as managers, business owners, leaders, and be really thoughtful about how we're using our most valuable asset, which I believe is our people, how we use that asset to really drive organizational success, which has to include an element of human and recognizing the people and how do we get goodness out of that talent.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point that our most valuable assets for a lot of companies is really the people, because without the people we wouldn't be able to continue on our businesses. So let's just kind of jump into it. We're probably going to talk for about 30-40 minutes, and then the plan will be to leave some questions, time for questions. So feel free to post that in the meeting chat and we will get to as many as we can. But Cassie, tell us, the US and particularly in Utah, we've had a really strong economy for the last several years. It's, would be described as being frothy. And even during a pandemic, we weathered the economy better than most, or weathered the pandemic better than most. But in 2022, we were seeing that there were interest rate hikes, there were hiring freezes, departures, layoffs, there's what was it, quiet quitting, right? A lot of that was happening. And so, it's kind of something that we haven't experienced in a long time. Now, some of us have been through a recession and have seen downturn, but there are a lot of younger employees here that haven't seen this. But tell us what you're seeing from the data that you have at BambooHR.
Yeah, so when we look at the data, the interesting part is there's no industry that's immune to what we're seeing and experiencing. And what we're seeing on the national trends level is also happening at the micro level of Utah specifically. So it's everywhere, which means that there's likely going to be a long tail on both where we're going, what we're experiencing, and what any kind of a turnaround is going to look like. So the things that we've noticed in particular is we're finding that we are, like, specifically the first time in BambooHR's history, and we've been around for 15 years, we focus on the small and medium business market, which of course is the backbone of our economy. That's who most employers are. But when we look at that data set, we're seeing that we're basically at net zero hiring. That's where the trend is. And it's the lowest that we have ever seen. It's lower than when the pandemic first hit and we had businesses that were shutting down, that were closing, that were going remote, that had hiring freezes. We're at a net zero trend. When we look at, where's this coming from? Interestingly enough, in the technology world, the growth curve on, hey, we're hiring and we need more tech talent. If you're in tech, you've been feeling that pressure. But we saw that about a year ago, that curve started to trend downward. So technology specifically has been on that journey for a little bit longer. Some of it is a little bit of the reverse. So professional services, technology, it's been the field that had the most open jobs and the least amount of qualified talent out in the labor market. Even looking at statistics coming out of the BLS or other federal organizations, specifically back in the fall, those sectors still had the hardest time, not just finding talent, but actually having qualified talent pools available to them. And as we're seeing that businesses start to constrict and tighten belts, that issue artificially goes away, but we still have an underlying problem of, do we have enough technology, professional services talent out in the workforce? And regardless of where we go economically, what our path looks like in potential recession times, that's still an ongoing issue that we need to be thinking about out into the future, because we will come out, right? We go through cycles, there's ups and downs. And as we're starting in this downward journey, I think it's important to make sure we don't lose sight of, are we developing that talent that we need for tomorrow, so that when things shift, we're not going right back into the world that we came out of, which was unprecedented. I mean, I'd
Right.
never seen a time like this where you have people leaving jobs without jobs and they can just get a job. That was unsustainable in my mind, and we're already starting to see some of that shifting.
Yeah, and I think that sometimes people say in the economic downturn is the best time to build a business, because there's a lot more opportunity. But for those of us that are in the workforce, what do you think the biggest concerns are? What kind of provisions should we be taking in terms of if I'm an employee at a company, should I be worried about being laid off?
So I always take the mind approach of why wouldn't you, rather than worry, why wouldn't you always have a plan?
Uh-huh.
What would it look like if you lost your job? Now, it could happen through a layoff. There could be, any number of reasons why a business doesn't survive, and you're out looking, you're trying to find something new. So number one, always have a plan. Think ahead. What would it look like? What would I do? And then if you have a job, are you executing against that what if scenario? Just like you save money for a rainy day, right?
Right,
You
right.
have that budget set aside to prepare for unexpected things. How can you prepare for that in your current job? I think, the more comfortable you might feel, it
Uh-huh.
usually means the less that you're actually paying attention to potential threats and influences that could come in. Just like we ask businesses and leaders to be thoughtful about, kind of a SWOT analysis of
Sure.
what are the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities. Are we doing that for ourselves, for our families, for our career, so that we're not just left to, sit there and feel the repercussions of what are coming, but be an active driver. And so a lot of that is, how are you thinking about your current knowledge and skills?
Uh-huh.
What does your reskilling plan look like, regardless of what your employer offers?
Uh-huh.
There's so much out there that you can be an active driver of. Your network, people. Are you building connections that matter? Are you, thinking about the future, and are you a known quantity? Are you showing up and adding value both in your job, in your relationships, and inside of your network? Those are things to think about as you put together a realistic plan for the ups and downs in the economy and being an employee.
Right. Yeah. And I think that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, that contingency plan. I remember when I would hire people to come work at my startup and they'd say, well, what if this doesn't work? And I was like, well, the worst case scenario is you go get another job, and there are jobs.
Yeah.
There might not be as many right now. I did a search just today on Indeed, in Utah. There was something like 56,000 available positions. When I narrowed it down to tech jobs, it was about 3,600. And I think in years past, we've seen about at any given time about 6,000
Yeah.
available tech jobs in Utah. So that number is almost cut in half. There aren't as many, but there are still jobs available out there. Now we've seen a big shift, in the workforce over the last couple of years. We saw employers that were really focused on hyper growth. So they were scaling and hiring massively. But then we also saw, remote work. And so we saw companies even during the pandemic who said, rather than just focusing on Utah, we'll hire from any 50 states because we're going to bring people, let them work wherever they want. And then we saw an increase in wages. To me, it felt pretty significant, at least on the hiring side, where I was like, gosh, like this junior engineer, the starting salary to be competitive was a lot higher than I had been accustomed to. The amenities, employee benefits, all of that. Is this changing? What are you seeing now with the market?
Yeah. Well, if we look back just a little bit, the BLS has publishes stats on both where wages are going, but also where benefits are going and the dollars assigned to those. And this in 2021, coming into 2022, we have seen the largest percentile increase in both wages and benefits that we've ever seen. And benefits usually lags behind where wages are going. But when we look at the percentile change, right, we were hovering around an average of 2-3% change, and it jumped up to 5%. Those are pretty big swings. So a couple of things to be thinking about. Employees are used to the employee favored market, right? They're used to being able to demand higher wages and benefits. And as you know, benefits can't usually turn on a dime.
Yeah.
You have planned documents, like you've locked and loaded on these costs for your organization. But it is also pretty painful for employees when you make adjustments or remove benefits, things like that. So one of the recommendations I have is, are you taking a holistic human-centric view to this, not just the budgetary component?
Sure.
Yes, we've got to be mindful of those dollars, but are we thinking about our total rewards, our wages, but also our benefit plans through a holistic well-being lens about what does it mean to take care of our employees and what are the benefits that we need to be offering? You know, we started in the world of, we check the box, we offer health, dental, vision. Yeah. But are we actually even getting value out of those benefits? You know, do you have good utilization patterns? Or are you really kind of flushing that money down the drain, and your employees don't get the value, but you also don't get the credit of those dollars that you're spending? That, you know, we've seen our employees are wanting more flexibility in work. They're also kind of demanding more flexibility around the benefits that are offered and being able to use them in ways that best benefit them.
Yeah.
So taking that holistic employee human perspective, I think, is going to be important going forward, because we're likely going to have hard decisions to make. There are places where we're going to have to be cutting back, and how do you make those choices? Yes, you can just look at, here are my levers for getting the dollars where I need them to go. But let's think about the human experience as well, and really be accountable for what that's going to look and feel like for our employees. So continuing to engage, getting feedback from employees. If we have to make hard decisions, let's make them, but let's do it in a way that we're communicating and transparent about why we're doing it, but also what the goals are we're trying to accomplish with the dollars that we're still allocating to wages, benefits, whatever it is that we're focused on.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's such a good point there. The benefits are such a huge aspect of it, but maximizing the value out of that, so it's really benefiting the employee. That's kind of like an easy way to making sure that, you know, that you're paying for what you're paying for, right? You're getting what you pay for. So now, so yeah, we've seen a lot of businesses kind of go through significant changes with the pandemic. And it's a weird time because we don't have any like history of what this meant for, you know, modern day times when there's a pandemic and you have supply chain issues, you know, moving a workforce completely remote, you know, things like that, and challenges that we had that we're still feeling the repercussions from. But as business leaders, what lessons do you think we can take away from the situation, and how should we try and think about future proofing our companies and our workforce?
Yeah, I guess the first question I'd ask is, did you learn anything?
Yeah.
You take the time, you know, as a leader, as an organization, did you take the time to personally step back and saying, what am I realizing? How should I be thinking differently? There's no one right answer here, but are you taking time to learn? Or are you just going to muck your way through it? And
Right.
maybe you do okay, and maybe you don't. I think as leaders, as business owners, because it impacts real humans, people with families and needs, that we have that responsibility to do that. Some of the learnings that I think are fairly universal, right? You might have a situation where it doesn't apply, but thinking about, like, employees have been asking for more flexibility. We've seen that through the idea and lens of remote work, but flexibility means more than just remote and virtual. It also means flexibility around when work is done, right? The timing and how we work together as teams, but also how we're individually productive. So how are you as an organization? What is your remote, hybrid, virtual strategy? Being clear, what's the learning on that? And then like, let's put the recession lens on top of it.
Yeah.
What if things are hard? Does it still work for us? And what do we need to be prepared for there? There could be issues there. I think remote work is here to stay as an opportunity, as a lever, and as an expectation. I don't know that that's ever going to undo itself. And so are we building and thinking as a business about this as a permanent, ongoing opportunity to drive productivity, accountability, and also this idea of engagement. We've all felt it, but have we taken the time to recognize this has been hard on all of us as humans?
Yeah.
To go through the pandemic, to go through that isolation to varying degrees. And it's important for us to be at our best, cognitively, to be able to focus on hard, critical work. It means we have to be thoughtful about overall well-being, and are we creating connection, providing environments that enable people to really focus on being effective and productive. So as we think about remote work, it's here to stay. And then also, how are we thinking about employee well-being and burnout?
Yeah.
It exists. It just does. I mean, how many of you have been in an 8, 9, 10-hour day of back-to-back Zooms?
Right.
It can be a regular occurrence. We're finding that employees report spending less time and less value-added time with their managers since the pandemic started. And we're not actually seeing that it's changing now that kind of the idea of the pandemic isn't as critical and, top of mind. We're still seeing that that's true, as people are missing that connection. And it's, yes, on a human level, but it's even the idea of, what is my job and how am I providing value to the company? And do I know that I'm achieving that goal? So how are we going to address burnout going forward?
Right.
I think it needs to look different. And, are we working with our leaders and with our employees to find the solutions that work best for us? That's going to be an important one. I think leadership is always important.
Yeah.
It's also one that's never going away, but we've recognized more than ever that they are the key to employee engagement, satisfaction, retention.
Right. Right.
It's your direct manager that really influences whether you're having a good day or a bad day, and also directs the work that you're doing. So what does it look like to continue to invest in and grow great leaders for your organization? What's the learning that you've come away with through these unusual times over the past couple of years that now is just a permanent part of your philosophy, how you do business, how you drive engagement, retention, but ultimately it's all about productivity. And are we building a healthier, stronger business? Are we meeting our goals, both from the feel good side of why we do what we do, but also from a revenue perspective, and tying that all the way back into how we develop leaders, but also how each individual on the team knows their role, knows how to make a contribution. And we're going to need those things if times continue to get more difficult financially, which that's what I'm planning for. That's what I'm assuming, and putting together, like, how would we respond? What's the next step? What would we do here? How do we get half pace in front of it, knowing that there is no crystal ball?
Sure. Yeah. I was talking to another organization that tracks all the venture funding kind of out in the market. And she said, based on the data that they were seeing, they could foresee about a year ago where the market was going. So she said that they naturally, as a company, stopped hiring, and so as a result, they didn't have to do a layoff, maybe like other companies have who didn't have access to that same information. So it is really interesting on how you can best prepare for these times. And, I think there is this, leaders sometimes, when I get it, I'm an entrepreneur, we're overly optimistic.
Yes.
Otherwise we wouldn't be able to do what we do, for a living, right? We have to be overly optimistic, but there has to be a sense of realism on what the trajectory looks like, but also understanding that there's humans on the element, there's a human element on the end of it, because, as our workforce is our biggest asset, is probably our biggest expense as well.
Yes.
And it's a easier way to kind of make some cuts, and have that directly impact the bottom line. So it is a fine balance. So we've had some layoffs here in Utah. We had a slew that happened right before the holidays, which was unfortunate. I anticipate in 2023 we will see additional, but this is also an opportunity for people to think about career changes. I do remember back in, I graduated from college in 2000, and about 2001 we saw a big decline in, and there was a big resurgence of people going back to school or getting workforce development training, and that was the industry that we were in. But because that the economy had been so well, it wasn't actually very well funded, and so there was a lot of catch up to help these individuals kind of retool themselves. But what would you say to someone who's been maybe recently laid off, or maybe even like they're seeing the writing on the wall and they're saying it's time for me to start coming up with my plan B or a career change? What is the best thing that they could do to help prepare for that?
Number one, think about, what does departure look like and who do you want to be? How do you want to show up in that moment? Whether it's voluntary and you're initiating a change, or even, under the worst scenarios where it's involuntary, whether you expected it or not.
Yeah.
Wow, all of a sudden they don't have a job. And, I've been in HR for over 20 years. I've often been in those conversations. And first of all, let's just acknowledge it's excruciating on a human level.
Yeah.
Right. It's the most painful day in that person's life in many ways. And so if you're the individual going through that, have you thought about it ahead of time? We never want to imagine that.
Sure.
But if we think about it ahead of time, it lets us think and plan, like, who do I want to be and how do I want to show up? Because it actually will benefit you.
Yeah.
Never, ever want to burn bridges. And so what does that look like? You really ultimately want to build a departure that's graceful, positive, and just as memorable as what your entry was like. Right? We want to be professional. We want to be amicable. We want to retain and even build those networks. And unfortunately, in those hardest moments, the way we show up has a really long memory to it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You could work for a place for a super long time, and the way you depart can completely erase every contribution you've made, or it can really elevate you to a whole new level of people going, wow, that's a good human. I want an opportunity to work with them again in the future.
Yeah.
Right. And so never underestimate how you show up in those moments and the opportunity that it has for your potential future opportunities. Think about the relationships that you're leaving, how you want those to be. Maybe if you have relationships that are not excellent, what could you do to make those better? Right. You don't have to just walk away and say it is what it is. I believe in moving to action. So what's an action you could take to improve your relationships and fortify the network that you have? Because your brand is going to follow you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whether you want to or not. Obviously, if you're leaving an organization, work with them to give a proper amount of notice. And I believe it goes on both sides. Yeah. Like, as an employee, I don't think you owe some burdensome obligation to a business. But as an individual, I take professional pride in ensuring that if I transition out, I'm not leaving the rest of the individuals in a really difficult spot.
Sure. Yeah.
Right. And so just being thoughtful to that. You mentioned learning and education. If you're not learning, you're already falling behind.
Yeah.
The pace of technology, you have to be reinventing yourself at all times. I've been at BambooHR for 10 years, and I feel like I'm on my 10th career here. It's just, the business needs are evolving. And if you are not evolving and growing, then you're falling behind and you're likely going to become irrelevant without even noticing it.
Sure.
I always like to stress test that. And I'm like, do I feel comfortable in my job? And
Right.
if I'm feeling really comfortable, that means I'm not stretching. I'm not growing. I'm not curious and hungry for what I'm missing and not seeing. So that's the other thing I would look at is if you're feeling comfortable, you're going to probably feel a lot more discomfort later on if you're not a lot more intentional and assertive about ensuring that you're critical, you're needed, and it's measured by the impact that you're having in your role.
Sure. Yeah, that's really great advice. I think, I've certainly been at jobs where I would love to like quit like Jerry Maguire and go out with this movie moment. But recognizing that it might feel good for a second, but having that be your legacy is not a great thing that you want to have as part of your reputation. But I think what's been so great about our community here and the things that I've seen is that as there have been layoffs, that there are people that are, and we'll post some of these resources, some job boards and job fairs and things like that, and people who really genuinely want to help. And a lot of times that networking and spending that time to get to know people is key. So, I know it feels awful if you've been a part of those layoffs, but also I had a friend who told me, think of this as like a data point and not your entire journey. It doesn't define you and it sets you off on a different direction. And a lot of times, there are different opportunities that wouldn't have come your way had you not been in this situation, as crappy as it is. There's always more opportunity. So
and there is
go
always that boomerang opportunity, right?
Yeah.
Maybe your future comes back on that path. We've been talking a little bit about what individuals can do, but I also don't want to forget, what can employers do? There's a lot of things we cannot control.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that you are terrible if you've had to make that difficult business decision of doing layoffs. But in that motion, are we doing the best that we can do? So really holding ourselves accountable for the comms, how we think about how the message is delivered. Again, knowing these are human beings.
Yeah.
There's somebody who's wondering about, will I have a house? Will I have a meal? Basic survival, like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So being thoughtful about comms, but also, how can you help them get to that next place? I love the community in Utah because we do rally together. I have seen multiple times where businesses and organizations rally together to help people find the opportunities that do exist. I know that we did that right when the pandemic first hit.
Yeah.
Our talent acquisition team got together with other recruiters and we're like, let's put together this board and help people find positions that are available. We were offering like resume tips for any individuals who wanted. We were providing interview screening, like, do you want to upskill and refresh on that? And so there are things that we can do as an employer, especially with the talents that we have in human resources and leadership and like hiring and all that. Like we can be giving to people and help them land on their best foot for finding that next opportunity.
Yep, absolutely. I love that you guys got together with other people in the community around the pandemic too. So I think that's like something that's, I don't want to say it's unique about Utah, but very special about Utah in the way that the community does rally together. So, let's talk a little bit about different industries and sectors. Are there more that you're seeing you talked about professional services, but that can actually span among, it doesn't have to just be in tech, right? I mean, there are other industries that use professional services, but are there industries or sectors that you're seeing that where the hiring is still very strong more than others?
We're kind of seeing it's the same thing across the board. That said, it's for different reasons.
Okay.
Right. So in technology, business services, that's where we're seeing just a lack of actual qualified talent.
Yeah.
So businesses, technology, it's evolving fast enough that it's hard to get the people to that pace and to that level. an example. I've been part of multiple conversations, probably over the last 5 years here in Utah, where we're looking at how do we grow and build tech talent here?
Yeah.
Because the junior talent is relatively easy to like support and create, but it's really those mid and senior roles that are where the talent scarcity gets really acute and painful for organizations. And there's no fast way to get there.
Right.
Right. I mean, this is where we have to start talking and thinking about education and, even K through 12. What are we doing to help build the skills of tomorrow, knowing that every 2 to 3 years we're retooling, right? We're up leveling. And so how do we want to do this like from a macro system experience inside of Utah? So I think those pain points will continue. We look at, we're still seeing supply chain disruption going on.
Yep.
That's causing problems for other industries and sectors where they don't even have, their supplies coming in to make sales. Like for retail, we're still seeing issues there. The one thing that we're still keeping an eye on is the idea of there's available jobs, but people don't want those jobs.
Yeah.
And we'll see during this economic downturn, potential recession, like what is that going to look like? And will we see a shift in those supply demand issues where like, I don't know if you're like me, you might try to go to your favorite restaurant and they've cut back, they've cut down on their menu, or maybe they have reduced hours because they just don't have the supply of talent and labor who's willing to do that work. So I think that's an area that's still a question mark out there. The other thing that we had seen that's a question mark is we were watching non-technical roles competing for higher wages. And so you had scenarios where people are saying, I could do this job that's really hard and requires a lot of training and, can be an actual career, or I can go do this other role that's easier and make similar pay. We're not sure how that's going to continue to potentially influence like who's available for what kinds of positions. But it's another factor that stalls out. Will we have the talent we need for the future? Another concern that we're looking at, thinking about, and you're probably seeing in your organizations as we think about global talent.
Yep.
And if wages are too high domestically, we will have talent continue to export internationally. And the hard part there is then that's where that new talent creation is happening.
Right.
So not only are we not having those roles here, but the place where that new talent is being generated is not being generated here. And are we going to have this big gap in the middle of skill sets and competencies that we just continue to have bigger and bigger deficiencies on? That's a concern. And so how do we address it as an individual business? It feels almost overwhelming, but are there ways that we could start to tackle it in a community perspective, Utah specifically coming together, but even nationally? How do we want to continue to fortify the labor market with the skills and talents that we're going to need today, but 2, 3, 5, 10 years down the road, what's this going to look like?
Yeah. And I just think about even just the tech industry specifically, there's still a lot of really exciting developments that are happening in our market. We look at OpenAI, how that may change workforce, how it's even changing education, but also manufacturing. Having manufacturing brought back to the US is a federal initiative. My dad started off as a chip engineer for a chip company in Orem, which then got acquired and has since moved. And it's just so funny to me to think 40 years later, this chip, they want chip making plants here back in Utah. And so that opens up a whole new group of manufacturing. Is a different type of engineering, but are we prepared as a workforce to be able to handle those types of future jobs? We're going to get to questions, so feel free to post those questions in the chat. But I do want to talk about, so we've got the legislative session that starts on Tuesday. So what is that, a week from today? And our part-time legislature gets together for 45 days, and they tend to pass, 500 plus bills during that time. And this is also the time that they talk about the budget and how they're going to spend taxpayer dollars. Do you have any recommendations for our state leaders and our state government on what they can do to help us prepare for this future economy and assist those that are struggling right now?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. And I do want to put a giant asterisk on this. Is it needs to be a we, right? Yes, our legislature, our leaders, they need to be involved in it, but that doesn't mean that we as professionals, as leaders, as business owners, that we can step back, right, and wait for them to deliver in isolation. So a couple of things I think about, and one I already mentioned, we have a really unique opportunity here in Utah to build the talent of tomorrow, but specifically to build a national brand as a supplier of talent. Right? What does that mean? I mean, Utah has some really unique demographics, highly educated. Look at how many universities we have going around. We have a really strong competency around being, bilingual, having multiple languages that we speak. And we've got this booming tech sector that's really strong and establishing a presence. And so, are we building our brand as a supplier of talent, both for our own, let's keep it in Utah needs, but also just further expanding the benefits to residents of Utah, whether you work for a Utah company or not. And this involves really partnering with our academic institutions, yes, our colleges, but let's get serious about K through 12. Let's look at how we're helping that turn into talent and results for the workforce. Knowing that that's a long journey. We look a lot at, opportunities around diversity. And if we want more talent, we need to start engaging to get different demographics, different mindsets interested in these types of opportunities, and let's get them skilled up. The other one I think about, as you kind of highlighted and nuanced, is, are we being intentional in our economic strategy so that we do not become unintentionally reliant on someone else for our success? Let me give you an example. I recently I teach a class up at Utah State in their executive MHR program. And the MBA program, we took a trip to Singapore and Thailand, and we were meeting with businesses and government officials out there. And it was really interesting to watch Singapore, who, as it's a city nation, right? Their actual land space is so constrained that they rely on everything external for their survival. And going through the pandemic, their leaders had a significant wake-up call of, electricity, everything in their infrastructure was relied on externally, including the labor market. People come in to work and then they leave for the day. And it was really interesting to watch them take ownership and say, we have objectives to be self-sufficient at X levels in these ongoing, key economic drivers within our economy. And they're being aggressive about it. And so the question that I have is, what does that look like for Utah? How do we not find ourselves in a place where we're overly reliant on external forces so that we're being held back, if we could find a way to, have the appropriate level of self-sustainability for ourselves?
And it reminds me of this experience. I met with a former legislator leader, and he said, why do you tech people just keep hiring people from California? Why don't you hire our own kids? And I was like, what? Oh my gosh, it's not obvious to him that we weren't producing enough of the types of talent, that we needed, which
Yeah.
required us to go out of state. And when I explained that to him, he was like, "Oh, I just thought you guys just wanted to California or Utah." And it just blew my mind. Something that was so obvious to us, on this side was not obvious from the legislature. So, I could then explain that's why we care so much about our per pupil spend on education. That's why we keep talking about STEM education in K through 12 schools, is because we're recognizing that this is going to be our future workforce that we hire from, and we'd like more of it.
Yeah.
So it's really fascinating. I am going to put in a plug. We have an event on the 26th where we will pair you with a legislator, and you get to spend the day with them, kind of understanding their jobs. So if you want to meet with someone who's on the education committee or the tax and revenue committee or business and labor, you can definitely take that opportunity. I will post a link in there so that you guys can register. But the more we are talking to our legislators, the more that they will have a better understanding of what our needs and concerns are. So I encourage you to come to that if you're available. Well, so let's talk about, we've got a question in here. It's more of a comment, but I think this is really interesting. We got someone who was caught up in the pre-holiday layoffs, and seeing that remote work has really opened up a lot of opportunities, but they're also competing with there's a lot more competition, because now there's layoffs that have been happening with Google and Twitter and others. So, you're doing multiple interviews. They want to find something flexible, but it sounds like they might have to temper their salary expectations. Any advice here, or
Yeah.
recommendations?
So I love this example because it highlights, just as businesses are thinking like nationally about talent, as an individual looking for employment or wanting to be really thoughtful about your career path, you should also be thinking on that lens, like, how do you stack up in the labor market end to end? What does it look like? And how can you really compete in places that might feel like there's an advantage for whatever reason? I mean, we've all been in scenarios where if you get X on your resume, right, you've got it made. You can go wherever you want to go. It'll be interesting as, again, as we look at supply of labor against the demand of labor, we're going to see some things shifting. Even in hard times, yes, like get a job so that you can pay your bills. I think as individuals, if we're pretty intentional on what we need in an organization, right, to be clear on what it is that you're looking for, I think we all win when you find that double opt-in experience of it's the kind of organization, the kind of work that you can be successful at, and that you can actually be that value add and, are meeting those business needs. I've done a lot of coaching with individuals on how you put together your resume and think about your skills in less as a description of what your job looked like for that employer, and more describing what your competencies and capabilities look like. Yes, you can talk about, here's the work I did and the impact I made, but do you know how to describe your skills in a little bit more transferable lens?
Right.
Because, no two resumes are the same. And the way that you stack up your abilities, not just your experience, is going to matter more and more when we're competing remotely and nationally and globally for that spot.
Yeah, talking about resumes, and that kind of leads into the next question I got. How has for someone who's been in a job in a long time and that hasn't had to go out and apply, how have things changed over the last few years? How different is it?
It depends on the organization.
Okay.
That said, I would never let an organization's process hold me back from engaging in a much more advanced way. So, old school was this idea of you have to have a resume and you
Right.
have to have a cover letter and you have to do this. Like, I'm not saying you shouldn't do those things, but be intentional. And the advice that I give is more around, are you on LinkedIn? Yes or no?
Uh-huh.
You need to have a virtual presence. Are you maintaining that with the kind of rigor that you do a resume, but recognizing those are two very different tools?
Okay.
Right? The resume is a tighter story of why your skills and knowledge match the job you're applying for. LinkedIn or your online presence is where you really tell the story more holistically of who you are, how you make an impact, what you're passionate about, right? Why your talent that somebody else wants. So it's a very different way of describing competencies and capabilities. And, with your online presence, LinkedIn, this is where you really get to say who you are and tell stories about the difference you're making in the work that you do. Okay. So being aware of that. And the other one is networking. So by nature, I'm an introvert. I'm quite shy. I really like one-on-one relationships. But you are disadvantaged if you're not creating a network and making sure that you are a known quantity.
Yeah.
People know that you exist. And when they do, what is the brand that you bring with you? Yes, you get to influence that through your resume, through your LinkedIn profile, but it's also influenced through the way that you engage with your network, the relationships that you build with people. I love Maya Angelou's quote, people will forget what you said, they'll forget what you did, but they're never going to forget how you made them feel. Yeah. And so really invest in your network and invest in people, bring something to the table, care, give, contribute, be involved. And I think that that's going to be critical in this new global experience. It's how you get out of city X that you happen to live in and the 10 businesses that are within 10 miles of your home, right? We have to start adopting a digital global strategy for us having the most opportunities in the labor market.
Yeah, I think that's such good advice because I think LinkedIn for a lot of people was just like a digital representation of the resume, but you're saying you can really leverage it in a way to kind of express who you are as a professional. So I think that's really great advice. Sometimes I see a little bit of oversharing on LinkedIn, but to each their own. So
yeah. Just like whatever it is, own it. But yeah, be intentional. It does matter how you show up. I try to put on what's my value system? Yeah. And how do I want that to be portrayed in the way that I talk about the work that I do, and how I'm investing my time and skills. Be you, be authentic, keep it professional.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. Well, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to post two resources. There's a form for I think this is the David School or David Eccles School of Business they're doing an event on the 26th, and then we also have the Utah Layoffs page that was put together by some people in the community to post jobs. So we want to make both those resources available. I also know that Silicon Slopes is doing a virtual job fair, and then we have Utah Tech Week coming up in 2 weeks, or I think it starts on the 20th. And there are, if you go to utah.techweek.com, there are a variety of activities that are happening throughout the state. We're hosting one, and there's a founder friendly event, and there's a Utah Burger Club, and there's all sorts of great events that are happening, which are really great networking opportunities. And I know that it's tough to put yourself out there, but I can tell you, for someone who didn't feel like they were a part of the community, putting yourself out there are so many welcoming and friendly people here, and so would encourage you to kind of attend those. Cassie, this has been so great. I appreciate all the advice and the wisdom that you've provided, and really just your perspective when you're sitting at the BambooHR position. Is there any last words of advice that you have for people?
I loved your positivity. I mean, looking for a job is always hard. So just know that and then ignore it. Like,
Yeah.
go do it. You've got this. Rely on your network to support you. And, let's all pull together if we see people who are struggling, and, a rising tide lifts all boats. I think we are in charge of our destiny, and each of us has a role to play. So thank you for what you do. And thank you for the things you will continue to do.
Yeah, of course. And I just know that I've kind of, with my career, seen this in 2001. I saw this in 2008, 2009, and the recessions, and we always come out of it. It's never forever. So things get better. This is not the position we will always be in. It's just, it's a little wonky with the pandemic, but, I think there are still a lot of opportunities for growth here in the state. So thank you so much, Cassie. Thank you, BambooHR, for participating. And then if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me directly. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.